Okay, we're calling this meeting to order, and I think I get to hit the gavel. So this Building Board of Appeals meeting's being called to order. I'm going to read the introductory statement. This is my first time running it, so bear with me. The Building Board of Appeals is established by City Code Section 02.48.050. The Building Board of Appeals' task today is to determine whether or not the City of Annapolis, under Title 17 of the Code, the City Code, follow the application code requirements and use reasonable care and consideration when approving or denying the permit in question. Additionally, the board will determine whether there is substantial evidence to support the city's approval or disapproval of the permit in question. If the board determines that this appeal is outside of the board's jurisdiction as defined in the city code, the board may dismiss the appeal prior to receiving any testimony or documents relating to the merits. Additionally, if the board is convinced that testimony offered by any party is clearly not relevant or material to the issue on appeal, the board may rule either that the testimony not be received or the testimony be limited. Finally, a person aggrieved by the decision of the Building Board of Appeals may, pursuant to this section, appeal this decision to the Circuit Court for Anne Arundel County, pursuant to Maryland Rule Title 7, Chapter 200, as may be amended from time to time. We're going to do roll call. Here.
Mr. Dorman?
Here.
Webb?
Here.
Okay, I think there's an administrative matter, the minutes that has to be approved. So we want to approve the minutes on January 30th, 2024. Has everybody on the board read those minutes?
No question. No question.
Okay. Can I get a move to approve the minutes?
Oh. Second.
Then the minutes are approved. So we'd like to swear in any witnesses that plan on testifying today. So if you intend to testify, please stand and raise your right hand and affirm. Do you swear or affirm under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you are about to give to the Building Board of Appeals is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Okay. So we are here to meet the appeal on the 301 Halsley Road permit number BLDR 2025-00174, 194, I'm sorry. To bring everybody up to speed, this is a permit for the renovation of a house. Sometime during construction, the scope of work increased, and the need to sprinkle the house for fire protection is the subject of today's meeting. The reason for the appeal is claiming that there are code differences in the interpretation of the work area, and this has created a condition of financial hardship. Would you, whoever's going to present the case or talk, please come forward and state your name. So the microphone in front of you has a button, and if the green light is on, it is active. And if you guys could introduce yourselves and tell us what your association with the case is.
I'm Adam Knight. I'm the building inspector for the city of Annapolis.
John Manasseh, Chief of Code Enforcement, Planning and Zoning.
Joseph Lewis, I'm the permit expediter liaison to the client, to the owner.
And I'm Gloria Mishu, the owner.
Yeah.
I'm Gloria Mishu, the owner.
Yes. Okay. Thank
Okay.
you.
So, Mr. Lewis, do you want to go ahead and present the
Sure.
case to this group?
Yes. So I became involved with this project to obtain a building permit for the renovation, interior renovations. We did obtain that permit, and the areas that were permitted were to remove a demising wall in the kitchen on the first floor, to renovate 2 bedrooms on the first floor, and the bathroom on the first floor. So the permit included those areas. And then on the second floor, there was also a bathroom that was reconfigured internally there. And that was the scope of work that was on the permit that we applied for, and that was what the permit was issued for. During that scope of work, there was also, in the permit, there was also electrical work and plumbing, of course, for the bathrooms, and HVAC work, reconfigurations. During that time of construction, it was discovered that the exterior walls did not have insulation that was to code. It had deteriorated. It was also discovered, various electrical.
And there was
Yeah, some places there was no insulation, which was of concern. That was not part of the intended work, but that was discovered during the incidental work. Also in the basement, there was plumbing that was changed or modified in such a way as required by the code, which included some new plumbing piping through the basement. The basement's unfinished for the most part. There was demising walls in the basement with wood paneling on it. During that incidental work, that paneling was removed, and also the paneling on the outside exterior walls of the basement was removed to expose the basement concrete wall for half of the basement, to verify if there was any insulation. Energy use is, a concern. The electrical system for the house was entirely upgraded, which included a new electrical meter, new wiring, and new receptacles, to make the house code compliant. This is a significant upgrade for fire safety. The number 2 reason for fire fatalities nationwide is electrical fires, and they are the most fatal because it's hidden in the wall. So this upgrade was very substantial in fire compliance, And so what occurred was during the inspection, many of these areas had the drywall removed, on the exterior walls, and paneling in the basement was removed, to investigate for the condition of insulation, just general maintenance, code compliance. Because as it was discovered by the code, you're required to bring it to code by various different codes. What we were proposing is that the city's definition of the work area, which triggers fire sprinklers, is an area of construction that is intended. It's the extent of the floor area as measured by a boundary which construction specified in a permit takes place. And to determine the area of construction, when a demising wall is either constructed or altered, both adjacent spaces are included. And we agree with that. We're not, there's huge portions of the house, that on the first floor, a wall was removed. Both those spaces, the kitchen and the living room, were counted. Upstairs, there was a wall that a door was moved. And so
Framing for, there's a huge bedroom upstairs, and the ensuite had no door. So I had a door frame. Oh, I'm sorry. So what he's referring to is there's a very large bedroom upstairs. It's huge, and there was no doorway to the ensuite, and so I had the door framed, and therefore that counted that entire bathroom and entire bedroom. And I said, well, we'll take the framing out, but then I was told we couldn't do that. So that was a huge part of this whole situation.
the other area, after much review, it was determined that the basement area was what brought the entire scope of work under the city's definition over the 50% that would require fire sprinklers, just because the basement walls had been altered by the plumbing and the removal of the wall panels for the insulation in just half of the basement. Yeah, correct. So really in question is that incidental work that occurred in the basement. You know, that was not intended on the permit. It was incidental to some of the permitted work to be code compliant. And the city ordinance that actually created this definition, the city ordinance 50-16, and this, I don't have the date on it, 50-16, it's struck from the building code, the International Residential Code. It struck the fire requirements of that code and replaced it with the city's definition. Is the gross floor area under permit when it exceeds 50% for structures with more than one building permit over the previous 24 months was the adopted city ordinance, which created that definition that included both sides of the walls. But the city ordinance did not strike the other portions or any other codes. So we have a situation where there is a similar definition that has been adopted by the city of Annapolis, and this is the International Existing Building Code, which is more particular for a type of structure that is existing. So it's different than the general building code. And that takes into consideration situations where you do have an existing situation that creates complications. And these two codes can coexist at the same time. We're not asking for one or the other, which one. We're just asking that both apply, because the International Building Code defines the work area as that portion or the portion of a building that is reconfigured as indicated in a permit that is intended area in a permit, and it also excludes other portions of the building where incidental work entailed by the intended work must be performed in the building where the work was not intentionally intended by the owner or is specifically required by that code. So the existing building code adds another element to that same definition, which would allow an owner to bring other portions of the building to code. For instance, say the electrical systems, which, you have to cut holes and pull wires, and, sometimes you have to remove significant amounts of sheetrock or do those kinds of work in areas that was not intended. And this code would allow an owner to perform those without being penalized. Just by applying just the city code, the property owner is being penalized for, say, in the basement, making the basement code compliant with insulation and the upgraded plumbing and upgraded electrical. That was not intended work. That was incidental. The basement is not being renovated, changed. There was some additional framing to conceal plumbing pipes. We've suggested to remove that and return the basement back to its original condition. We are asking just for the consideration of the international existing code definition. This is in chapter 2 that defines work area, that it is also applied in addition to the city code definition of work area. Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions for the appellant?
Not at this time.
Just so I have one question. The existing permit, there was always some ancillary work that had to happen in the basement, like electrical and some plumbing things that were going to happen down there previously, that I'm assuming that did not bring that area into the work area. But when you were down there to do that work, this is when it was discovered that there was substandard insulation in that whole space.
Correct.
So the entire wall surfaces in the basement had to be removed to both investigate where the insulation wasn't or was, and to allow the insulation to be installed to bring it up to code.
Right. Correct. And this is only in half of the basement, not the entire basement. The other half of the basement, the concrete wall was previously was exposed, and that investigation was on the first floor as well. The sheetrock was removed from the exterior walls for a similar reason, but there was already permitted work in those areas. So,
So part of the basement did not. It was exposed walls, and you had to frame and insulate those as well.
the half of the basement was already framed and had existing wall panels on that framing. The wall panels were removed to investigate the insulation in those areas, which is approximately half of the basement area.
So half of the, I'm sorry, just to make sure I understand. So half of the basement was not insulated and was not touched.
Right, correct.
And the half of the basement that, because I don't see this on the plan, the half of the basement that, was affected, re-insulated, studs had to go up, I assume, in some areas.
Yeah,
Was that partitioned from the other unconditioned, unimproved half of the basement?
it was. Yes, correct. It was previously already partitioned from the other half.
Okay. And which part, so when I'm looking at the plan, I see the existing utility area, then there's a, all right, I'll hold this up. There's existing utility area, which looks like a big open space, and there's an existing storage and existing storage.
The one on the right is the one where we took the wall panel off and the insulation was coming down and everything. The one on the area on the right. The area on the left was unfinished.
Okay, this is unfinished and remains unfinished.
Correct.
Okay, so this is the area that from this whole side of the basement.
Correct,
Correct.
yes. That side had the wall paneling over the concrete.
Okay, is there anything else that you'd like to add?
Well, yeah, I'm asking for consideration, I guess, because, I did purchase it as a primary residence. My intention was to do the kitchen and the bathrooms. And, through the process that he's speaking about, we found out there was absolutely no insulation on the exterior walls. There was some of that area that you were looking at, the lower right in the basement. There was some insulation from the 60s or whatever, but, it had all like melted down the walls, smelled funky, all that kind of stuff. So it's all dried out. It's all good now. We had no intention of doing the basement. So going back to talking about the upstairs, when the electrician came in and started putting, updating all the electrical and stuff too, because that was kind of funky and the wiring was weird. So,
It's not code compliant.
not code compliant. I don't know
It's
what
from
the
the
terminology
60s.
is. Sorry. But anyway, that's when we found out there was absolutely zero insulation in the walls. And again, life is what it is, but at the same time, I don't care if I put 50 smoke detectors in my house, but I just don't want fire sprinklers. It's an enormous cost. I'm happy to insulate. I want to insulate. I want to bring the house up. But the other thing too that doesn't matter today is I have spoken to my alderman, and she's spoken to some of the other government officials, and again, you can't take my word for it, of course, but the intention is to have this code removed from the city of Annapolis, when the elections come up, because, to have a single unit, one family house renovated and ask for everybody to put fire sprinklers in is just an incredible amount of money. And by my little bit of research that I did, there hasn't been a death in the city of Annapolis, from a fire in over 15 years. And most of the fires that have occurred because people don't have the proper smoke detection, working smoke detection. So I'm asking for your help and your consideration in not making me put fire sprinklers in my house. I think that's it.
Okay, thank you. If there's no other questions, I'd like to give an opportunity for the city. Mr. Manessa or Mr. Adams, if you'd like to respond to the appeal points.
Sure. So this originally started out as a code case where Inspector Daniel Johnson went out, determined that work had been started without permits. And in his description, he had said that the entire house was being renovated. He also did the plan review when it came in. And through my discussion with him, he also stated, through the lack of information on the plans, that it appeared that sprinklers would be required. So I said to him, unless you want to keep going back and forth, you can simply notify them that a field inspection would need to occur to determine if sprinklers were needed. If sprinklers were not required, then we would move on. If we felt in our determination that you exceeded the 50%, then we would at that point require full sprinkler protection. So that inspection did occur. I happened to have gotten a call. I went out and met with Mr. Lewis on site, and I walked the site with him. I explained to him how we do the determination for sprinkler systems, the contributing factors, the square footage, the each side of the wall that you work on, things to that. And we did this on every floor, and including the basement. And at that point, I did inform him that I would be putting a hold on the project because visually, sprinklers were required. But what I also offered to him was that if he could come back to me with a plan showing me the exact square footages of each room and the square footages of each room for the renovation, then we together could do the calculation. So we left. We got called back. He provided a plan. It did not cover all the information. Some of the areas, he said, he didn't feel were necessary. And I reminded him that I was very clear in what I said to him. Provide a complete set of square foot for the entire job, each floor. He said he had stated that he had used a federal guideline for sprinklers. I said, sir, we're not a federal city. We're the city of Annapolis. We have our own guideline. So we took the time. We measured the house together. I showed him why it was required, where the square footage is at. So I said, at that point, full sprinkler protection is required. At that point, I also explained to him what his procedural rights would be. One would be to talk to Mr. Manasseh if he disagreed with my interpretation and my finding. And the second would be to come here to the board if he felt that I was interpreting the code in an improper manner. So at that point, this is where we are right now. So with most everything he has said is true, but it does boil down slightly to the basement, because that's where they took the paneling off the wall and the insulation out of the wall, which now opened up half of that basement. Building the two walls in themselves were very minor to cover up a plumbing pipe. But if it's an unfinished basement, they could have made the decision not to and to get away to stay under that 50% threshold. And the reason why I held strong to that is because we had had several visits and phone calls with both parties here, myself. And so there was no hiding any information. There was no reason to try to deceive. It was strictly what the City of Annapolis has set out, what the procedure was, and how they have instructed us. And then we carried that on to the applicant and to Mr. Lewis. So I'm not sure what else I can add to that.
This, the reference to conflicting codes and the reference to an existing, an international existing building code, can one of you talk to that and explain how the city code takes precedent over that, or if it doesn't or does?
Yes, sir. There's a few different sections that apply. Mr. Lewis mentioned the existing building code as having a different definition, but in the scope listed in the existing building code, it says this code shall apply to repair, alteration, change of occupancy, addition and relocation of existing buildings. But there's an exception right below that says detached 1- and 2-family dwellings and townhouses not more than 3 stories above grade plane and height with separate means of egress and their accessory structures not more than 3 stories above grade plane and height shall comply with this code or the International Residential Code. So in the existing building code, it's more geared towards commercial structures. However, it could be applied and used to residential, but the exception here is sort of pointing that out, that the building code may be more appropriate in some cases. The residential building code is what we apply to single-family dwelling projects when they're under permit, because it really, the existing building code just sort of doesn't really match with residential structures quite as well as it does to commercial. So we use the existing building code on commercial, but we use the International Residential Code for dwelling units that are under permit. And so when the city code modified the International Residential Code, it includes language for new construction and also for alterations and additions to existing structures. So that's where we get into the debate about is the project over or under 50%? And our definition of work area, as Mr. Lewis stated, includes just the boundary areas of the wall. And if there's a wall either constructed or removed in between the space, then both sides of the wall count. Like he agreed that was what was our interpretation and how we applied it. There is a section of city code under 17.12.020B, which talks about how different codes are treated when there's a conflict. And it says, in the event of any inconsistencies between the provisions of the International Residential Code and the City Code, the more stringent code shall govern. So what that's saying is that if there's two pieces of language that differ, whichever one is more stringent and requires like a safer environment is the one which we apply. So if you're looking at definitions for work area or what constitutes work, then the more stringent of the two would apply. And in the city's definition of work, it says work means any construction-related activity that leads to the performance of action provided by the grading or building permit. So really, it's a very broad definition. And anything that you're doing in the house that's related to the permit constitutes work. So even something as simple as taking down the paneling in the basement and looking at insulation, even though that may seem like it meets the definition of incidental, it's still work related to the permit. And it needs to be included in the permit. With we do have incidences where at times, say somebody's putting in new electrical wire and they may need to cut out around an electrical box. We wouldn't necessarily consider that as like the cutting out around the electrical box of the drywall to do the work. That may be considered incidental. So we're not, applying it without some reasonable measure. But the entire basement paneling being removed is beyond incidental in my mind. I would just like to point out that the mention of fire sprinklers in the future, that really doesn't appear something that we can determine or that it's relevant to the case at hand. I'm not aware of any move to do such a thing. But that's all I have.
Right. So we have to apply this to the codes that exist today. So I know that there was a lot of back and forth emails between the appellant and the city, and it sounds like the city thoroughly looked at options and looked at how the building area was applied. Did the city consider things like closets that are adjacent to rooms that didn't have work in them? Was all of the things that were compartmentalized from the work included in the area that you guys came up with that exceeded the 50%?
More or less. Okay. I'm not sure exactly how to answer that for you. So, for example, I'm turning to the page just to refresh myself. So on the first floor, they added a closet into one of the bedrooms.
Mhm.
So that would have included that entire room, not just a closet,
Right.
because it was brand new wall. In the front bedroom, they did add a door to what's called the Jack and Jill bathroom.
Mhm.
So that would have included the entire front room. But even if they didn't add that door, they had taken the sheetrock out and the insulation out on the exterior walls.
Oh,
So
okay.
then that would have included that area there. About the only thing that wasn't included on the first floor is when you first walked in the door and you have a closet on the right-hand side and then going up the stairway. Other than that, everything else, all the sheetrock had been removed, as well as insulation. And then on the second floor, when I went up, at the top of the stair, there was a new wall built. Appears to have been a new door to the bedroom to the left. The bathroom at the very top of the stair had been completely gutted, inside and out. And then there was an area on the left side of the bedroom that had also been gutted and a wall had been modified. Now, the bedroom on the right had very little work, other than they had some pretty massive holes that they were using as chases for wires, is what I was told. So as Mr. Manasseh pointed out, I didn't count that. I counted the very obvious work areas where they were doing work.
So that would be bedroom, they're calling it bedroom number 4, which I think is the work that had minimal, the bedroom that had minimal work in it, that was not included in the calculation?
Yeah, the room to the right of the stair,
Mhm.
I did not include that in my calculation.
Okay.
But everything from the hallway, the bathroom, to the bedroom to the left, and that closet area was all included, because they all had bare walls or new walls that had been removed and replaced.
Any questions?
Yeah, can I ask, we talked earlier, the appellant, about entirely upgrading the electrical system in the house. Would you call that incidental work, or was that originally permitted?
The original permitted work for the electrical permit, I believe, was replacing the electrical panel, the electrical service, and providing some outlets in the kitchen area and the bathrooms. But at some point, it was determined that it would be better to provide new wiring to the entire house for code compliance, fire life safety. Electrical fires are the #1 lethal fires in the country. So upgrading the electrical system electively is more stringent than, not upgrading it. That work was electively done for code compliance for personal fire life safety to upgrade the electrical wiring throughout the house.
Okay. Is the panel in the basement? The panel that was replaced, is that in the basement?
Correct. Yeah,
Okay.
the existing electrical panel is located in the basement. That panel was removed and a new panel was provided. New electrical service was provided. New
If
circuit breakers.
if the basement work, which my understanding was not originally included in the square footage area, is that right?
Correct. There was
Okay.
no intended work in the basement.
Okay, so if that, and it was just insulation, I mean, I know you had this electrical work, but the rest of it was just the insulation work. You didn't do anything else.
Correct. The work that was in the basement was, the walls were, we didn't construct or remove any demising walls, which would be in the definition of area of construction or area of work. Those walls in the basement were not altered as far as removing or constructing new walls.
Okay.
The paneling was just removed.
Right, you removed the paneling, and I'm assuming you put drywall up?
We haven't done anything yet.
Oh, you haven't done anything yet? Okay.
It's still just exposed concrete. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And, oh, one last thing. If the basement was not included, do we all agree that you would not be over the 50%?
Yeah, I believe that was the consensus that we all agreed to, that the work area of the basement was the tipping point for the 50%.
Okay, thank you.
Got a question just for the city. So clearly the sticking point is the additional work in the basement, right? And bring that up to code compliance. Was there any consideration with removing the paneling, which is not nearly as good of a fire rating as the drywall, and having drywall there, which is definitely a little bit safer than the paneling? Was there any consideration looking into that?
No. And the reason being is it wasn't part of the scope of the work. So had they not touched it, we would not have required them to do anything down there except with one thing that I can think of offhand, as far as a building code and electrical code, and that would have been to provide a smoke detector if one was already not provided. And then other than the two walls that were built in the basement around the plumbing pipe. So we did have some walls, and they were new lumber. But to answer your question, no, because it would have been outside of our scope.
And was there any communication from the city to put insulation in there or better insulate that area in the basement?
No, again, because it was out of the scope of work for the permit. Other than going down in that basement just to see if all was still existing and for checking a smoke alarm, and I'm only talking on the building side now, we really wouldn't have looked at anything down there in itself. But again, because this started early on, okay, we covered the entire project with the review for fire sprinklers.
That's all I have.
I think we'll, yeah, please.
You did ask about the paneling and the insulation. So what, and I think Mr. Manasseh already addressed it, but one of the things that makes it important for us is the insulation that we would have put back most likely would have been batt insulation with brown craft paper. Brown craft paper cannot be left exposed. Okay, it's nothing that's necessarily in the code book, but the manufacturer themselves puts it on the craft paper with a warning notice that says that it cannot be left exposed. So therefore, that added to the work area immediately once they made that decision to do that. And that would have been old or new. Even leaving the old insulation, we still would not have been able to leave it exposed.
So it sounds to me like if the appropriate insulation, which is like a foil insulation down there, unfinished, that the city would have been, that doesn't constitute square footage count.
If it was foil based, that generally meets the flame spread for that. But the craft paper would not. the old insulation that was there, without going back and reading the notice on it, because it was old, it had already been covered, had already been protected, to say it in simple terms. So when we took that plywood off, the paneling off, we now exposed that insulation facing to a fire hazard. And that fire hazard is as quick as a fuse when it catches fire.
So is there any, currently is it that existing insulation staying? Or has it been replaced?
I don't know.
Okay.
I went to do a site visit earlier this week. Nobody was on site. I did not enter the building.
And so there hasn't been any conversation if that insulation actually was code compliant from a flame spread, that the city would be fine with that square footage. You can sort of see where I'm trying to, is there a way that is not, is the city taking into consideration that if the insulation meets the life safety fire code and it's left at that, does that, because it definitely is easier to remove panels, to put in electrical, right? And I think that the city would probably say that having new electrical wiring in a 60-plus-year-old house is definitely a better life safety piece. Has there been any discussions with that, or you're just at this point now and haven't moved forward past that?
Not on my end. Now, keep in mind, with putting new outlets in, if we are going to demo the existing wiring, doesn't necessarily mean we have to take all the wiring out of the house. When we take it away from the panel and we cut it at the top of the wall, the bottom of the wall, the side of the wall, we can always come back through and run a new wire down to an outlet. So it doesn't necessarily require you to remove all the wall covering. For example, we go back to the bedroom on the right-hand side on the third or second floor. They did all that without removing all the drywall. So we can do this same thing even in a basement with the floor joists and the walls going around, or furring strips. So it didn't require that to meet the code.
I also just want to clarify, when we originally received the permit, it didn't show the work in the basement, and because of that, the area was less than 50% and sprinklers were not required when we did the plan review. It wasn't until after that point when we realized that the whole basement had been altered with the removal of the wall covering. And then from my perspective, once that's started, then it's just area of work.
So one other question, just looking at this, it's fairly open floor plan, right? So when you guys are reviewing permits for like a studio apartment, does that whole, studio apartments don't have much in the way of walls. Do you guys consider that, or do you break that definition of space to a certain amount, or does every studio apartment in Annapolis automatically go to the over 50%?
When you say studio apartment, are you talking an apartment building?
Anything that you would fall under your residence.
Okay, well, an apartment building doesn't fall under the residential code because it's the residential code is strictly detached single dwelling units or townhouses. So if you have a larger building that has multiple units in there, then it's regulated by the building code when it's constructed. And then we're comfortable with that being regulated by the existing building code when they're undergoing alteration. So if you have multiple units and one unit is being altered, then it's not going to be over 50% of the entire structure. And that's when in the existing building code, usually if sprinklers are required, it requires alteration to greater than 50% of the building. And, the entire floor plan of the building is considered, not just that individual unit.
Yeah, I guess my question was more based on, if for instance, the the second floor here, right? It's a fairly, open floor plate. And if you were doing, adding a closet in there, if add a closet in each one of those rooms, do you look at both those rooms as the full square footage of the second floor, or because the work's so small, do you not? Because you could do very little work and push, based on the calculation, push something significantly over a 50%, and do little work in there. So I'm just sort of curious to how your precedents, you guys do these a lot. How does that fall within that? Because the term space, work area, and rooms are pretty defined, right? It usually has a door on it, but a workspace and a space in general is a fairly vague, broad term in its use.
Yeah, the question you're asking is a little bit hypothetical because there are very few dwelling units that are so small that somebody would just install one closet and impact the entire square footage of the space. It is theoretically possible. If somebody had a 500 square foot open floor plan unit and there were no walls inside of it, and they installed a 2 foot by 2 foot cabinet, or not a cabinet, a closet into their space, it's exposed to the entire apartment or that entire dwelling unit. Yes, it would be over 50% because the entire floor space would be included. But I can't think of in all the years we've, I know it's almost 10 years now that this code's been in place. I don't think we've ever had such a scenario. It's just too unusual. You've had one?
So you said you had one. How did the city deal with that from a permitting perspective?
It sort of started out in the same scenario, in the sense that they had a description of work of doing this amount. And then when I went out to do the inspection, they had done this amount. So so for the lack of a better term, it was a townhouse. Wasn't really a townhouse. It was an over and under house. 2 separate addresses, 2 separate units, 2 separate meters, everything. So the second floor, they wanted to renovate the kitchen and the bathrooms, which was fine, based on the description of the permit. Now, let's just say for general purposes, we'll call it 1,000 square feet. It was a very small space, 1 bedroom, living room. So in the living room, they wanted to add a washer and dryer room. So they built a washer and dryer, they cut out the floor, they put new plumbing in. And then they went into the bedroom. And now in the bedroom, they took the ceiling out. Now they're putting up a new ceiling. So now we went from the work area of just being the kitchen and a bathroom, the kitchen, the bathroom, the living room, and now the bedroom, which pretty much encompassed 100% of the unit. And the reason why it required sprinklers is separate owners, separate address, separate meters, separate everything, even though they were stacked at the time.
Yeah, thank you. I was just sort of, precedents, if you guys have dealt with this in the past, been dealt with.
Yeah,
Thank
very
you.
rare.
All right, I think we're going to close down testimony at this point, and we're going to talk among ourselves. Oh, okay. I need to ask if there's any public comment on this matter. Right, thank you. Okay, gentlemen. per the city definition of workspace, this is a 3,965 square foot house. 50% of it is 1,982.5 square feet. The total work area now, according to the documents we received, is 2,600 square feet, is 66%. So that would be finding like 618 square feet, which is almost like a 25 foot by 25 foot room. Just to kind of put this into perspective. Does anybody have any thoughts or a motion to put out on this? Or another way to look at this?
Part of that calculation, you're counting the entire basement, even if we went, more than half of the basement, it has a wall. You can't include that. We haven't touched it. We haven't done anything. You know what I mean? So you can't include that. I mean, by any code or any definition.
The record is closed for a moment, but
I'm sorry.
if we have a question, we'll come back. I mean, this is the third rail of remodeling in the city, and it's the one that nobody wants to hit. Is there any way to justify that this third rail has not been hit? Meaning the need to suddenly you need to sprinkle. So that's like, it's the point of every project that you either carefully plan for or accidentally hit. Okay. I mean,
It's just having some sort of a plan in there that shows the actual square footage so everybody has a full understanding from beginning to end, which obviously we're beyond that point here. I think would be definitely something the county should look at, because it makes it more black and white if you step outside that and everybody kind of agrees with that piece there. Because removing a sheet of drywall to do stuff, a lot of times builders don't see that as a big piece. Particularly here, it's hit, as you would call it, the third rail,
yeah.
And pushed it, pushed it over the edge. I understand bettering the, a bunch of codes that the city eventually wants to have, right? Better insulated buildings, safer buildings, but struggling with the fact that it does seem like it pushed it over based on the way that they have precedent to use square footage. I'm not sure I would approach it that way. I would approach it slightly differently. When you're replacing just a wall, but their precedent, I think, does push it.
Do we know, for this incidental work, the insulation in the basement, could they have left it alone and not done that, or would someone have come back? Would that have then gone? Does that question make sense?
But I'm sorry, would you mind pulling the microphone closer to you?
Yeah. So if they hadn't done the basement, like they found out there's no insulation in it because they had to replace some of the electrical wires and they'd cut holes and they're like, well, there's no insulation. Okay, great. And they just keep going. Would they then have been, in non-compliance with something else? Does that make sense? Like, because they didn't do the incidental work to bring it up to whatever today's code is?
Right. No, I understand.
I mean, I'm just kind of wondering if they're stuck in a, no-win situation here. It doesn't, it wasn't really their choice to go in and necessarily replace all this insulation. But I guess I'm wondering if it was just their choice or if they chose to do this.
So my question is, if the entire scope of work that was to be done on this house would have been on the permit application, then it would have immediately triggered the need for sprinkling. And at that point, decisions could have been made, perhaps, to avoid it. But it snowballed in a different way. I would like to open it up for a moment just to ask one more question. Reopen the record. Are you guys okay with me reopening the record for a second?
Yes.
Okay. Procedure. Thank you. One more question. I'm because I'm a little confused by it. The basement, the question that was brought up by Ms. Michelle, stating that only half of the basement was affected by this ancillary work, which triggered it. Is that what the city used to calculate, that half of the basement where the drywall and insulation work had to happen was included in that calculation, or did it somehow become the whole basement? Because it seems like there is a wall that divides the two halves.
If I could take a moment and kind of explain to the board how we determine that at a plan review. So what we generally do is if we look at the plan review, plans that were submitted, and through our visual observation, we feel that sprinklers are going to be right there at the crust. I've developed a form that we use, talking about me and the other building inspector, the plan reviewer. And the first thing I do is I go to SSTAT. I figure out how much SSTAT says that building has, how many square feet above grade, and if there's a basement, and is there a finished basement? And most often it will tell us if there is unfinished or how much finished space. So at that point, I'll use those calculations. If it's already a finished or unfinished basement, and they're not working in that part, no, I do not use that. But I would take the sum of everything, finished and unfinished, as what we would say proposed. So if we had 3,000 square feet between the three floors, and you were doing work on the first floor at 100%, second floor at, 25%, it would really boil down to what you're doing in the basement. And at that point, we would take only the area that was being worked on or had exceeded the scope of work. Okay, so yes, we used the total to start with, and then we use only the work area. And that's how it was done here also, visually and written out into the field during a site visit. So to answer your questions, no, I did not use the unfinished side because there was no work that had been done there.
Okay.
Other than it covered 50% of that basement floor where the work had been done.
pushing the entire project over 50% of the entire building.
I'm not sure if I quite understand.
No, I was trying to clarify so half of the basement was finished, half was unfinished. But you included the unfinished and finished part in calculating the total square footage of the whole house.
I do that as figure number one to say that this house is 3,000 square feet. Okay.
Mhm.
And then in the simple terms, I'd go back and I'd say, well, if we have 1,500 square feet of renovation or more, then now they trigger fire sprinklers. And so then I take all the areas that show renovation. And if they come at 50% or higher, I stamp it full fire protection required.
Mhm.
If I have a question about that, I may send it back to the designer, the architect, or the homeowner and say, I need this information. I need square footages of every floor, every room, and then every room or area that's being worked on. And again, if they come in at 49.9%, they don't meet that threshold. But when they come in at 50% or above, they do. I hope I answered. So, I mean, I got to start out with the sum of the entire building.
Yeah.
And then I take the renovation and or new additions, if that's the case, and see if they meet half of the original building.
Correct. Yeah, I think I understand. Since we opened this up, I'll give the appellant an opportunity to respond to this, and then we're going to close down again. I'm sorry. Before I switch it over to you, we have a question.
So with the basement, so the paneling was taken down. What about the floor and the ceilings? Have there been any work done in that basement on the floors and ceilings?
Not that I recall. Of course, keep in mind, I didn't know the flooring may have been removed, but when I went downstairs, I clearly saw the paneling. Some of it was still there. The insulation, some of it was still there, and then the two new walls that were built to cover the pipes.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Okay. Anything else? All right. Appellant or representative.
Yes, I would like to also just point out that, the area, the basement is the critical point that tipped this. And had it been a known prior to that this would trigger the fire sprinklers, the applicant would have elected to not upgrade the electrical system, to not perform a lot of this work. So her choice it was her choice. I mean, she chose to, and it is also a code compliant issue because when it's discovered, you're supposed to upgrade, correct that code violation or upgrade to the code. That's based on the owner of the property. That's their decision. So adhering to the entire code in its entirety is the more stringent when you have a situation where if you don't know, but if you do anything to this wall in such a way that you will incur, the fire sprinklers, that that would definitely sway people to not upgrade their homes, not upgrade their electrical systems, things like that. An altered or wall is if you intentionally are going to cut a hole in it or remove it. I mean, that should be the definition of altered. You're altering that space. In a lot of other states and municipalities across the country, because I do work nationally throughout the country as well, it is anytime you change an egress pattern, you add a door, window, or change any egress of how people move in the space, that triggers your work area as being altered. If you take the sheetrock off a wall, you're not changing the configuration of that building. If you add electrical outlets, you're not changing the configuration. You're not altering. If you decide to upgrade your electrical, you're maintaining your house. You know, you're not choosing to alter this space. I mean, you're deciding to keep your family safe.
I was going to let the city respond if they wanted to, but do we have any questions? Do you guys have any response?
I only have one, and I'm not disagreeing with his thoughts and processes at all. Okay. But one thing that I will say is that there was no description of work in the basement. The basement was off limits as far as we were determined in our plan review. And even when we went out to do site work, if we had been called out for a specific inspection. So the scope of work had changed when they decided to take the paneling down, to change the insulation, or to do anything down there. And that's also part of the crust of the matter. It has nothing to do with what the city did. It's only what the city took that permit to say. And that when we went out on site, that's what we expected to see. But we saw an expanded amount of work compared to what that description was for.
Thank you. If there's no questions, I'm going to close down testimony. Closing the record. Does anybody want to put forth a motion or further discussion?
Yeah, I mean, just some further discussion, I guess. I wonder if the paneling going up back in kind is, to me, if the ceilings and floors haven't been touched, it's almost a means and methods. Drywall going up sways me the other way. I mean, there is some work going on down there, right? So, I mean, the updated plans are showing some window replacements and a little bit of ancillary stuff, but it's ancillary work.
Yeah, I like this, just through the definition of the work area in the current code, it's just, for better or for not, intended or not intended, the scope of this project just became huge. I don't know how to, how do you put the toothpaste back in the tube?
I move to deny the appeal.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Do I have to vote on that? Okay. I also move or okay. Sorry. Okay, it's been second. So all those in favor of denying the appeal, raise your hand and state aye.
Aye.
Aye. Deny the appeal.
Aye. How do we close? Yeah. So we voted on this matter, and I want to thank everybody for their efforts, and thank you for following the process of the city. I do want to point out that there is an appeal process that we mentioned to the circuit court, which is part of our code as well. And thank you very much. Perfect. Let's see. No, just adjournment. All right,
I move to adjourn.
we're adjourned. Do I get to do that? Right.